Senator Price, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
If the majority of Indigenous people, as was polled at the beginning of the year, or at least many Indigenous people, see the voice as a means to giving them better design of laws and policies to protect them, and a majority of non-Indigenous people appear to support that from today's poll, why would you want to stand in the way of that?
Because we don't need a voice, we need ears. We need our leadership to have to use their ears and to listen to community. If anything, the situation in Alice Springs has demonstrated the fact that no matter who's trying to talk to the government, those in power, to actually implement common sense solutions, they're not in fact listening. So I don't see how this is going to be any different, that this new bureaucracy inserted in our constitution that will be driven by those.
Let's just talk about that bureaucracy, because you've laid out the case for why you're opposing the voice, and I'll quote from the manifesto that you co-wrote. So this is one of the scenarios that you paint. Imagine a future Labour Greens opposition wishing to block coalition legislation. It would run to the voice and have it hold up legislation. But isn't it clear that the body that the government is proposing is an advisory one with no power to block legislation?
No, it's not clear. I don't think that's clear enough. I don't think there's enough detail to suggest that is clear. And I would also suggest that as Indigenous Australians, we're some of the most overgoverned people in the country. We have so many gatekeepers on so many different levels. I see this as another form of gatekeeping, and most certainly I see it as an opportunity for a Labor Greens government to be able to control, because that's what they do in a lot of these Aboriginal organisations to suit their narrative.
Let's just go to what you said then. You said that it's not clear, but in fact the proposed language of the voice is clear. It says that the voice may make representation, may make representation. There's nothing there that compels future governments to follow or abide by that representation, is there?
Yeah, but how that representation is implemented is still completely in muddy waters as far as I'm concerned. And if the government is suggesting that, you know, the Parliament of the day are going to determine how this voice looks, then I see it as providing an opportunity to be a Trojan horse. We know that this current Labor government can push through any sort of legislation that they want. And if they think it's going to be the answer to everything, why haven't they legislated it right now?
Isn't that what's being debated at the moment? The principle, at least to begin with, that the voice is supposed to make representation, that it may make representation. Now, if you were reassured that that is indeed the language and that is the concept of the voice, would you remove your objection to it?
Look, I think the High Court could make any determination if those proponents of the voice were not happy that their representation was not adhered to or listened to or heard in any way, shape or form, then they could certainly use the High Court to be able to push that upon the Parliament. And I just see it as opening a can of worms.
I just want to come back to that question of the High Court, because former Chief Justice Robert French and Justice Hayne as well earlier on said that for the voice to have the powers that you're claiming, Parliament, that is Parliament, the body that you are part of, Parliament would have to grant them. Parliament, and I quote Justice French, can't be compelled by the voice to make laws, nor can the voice be prevented from Parliament repealing laws. This is from a former Chief Justice. That's a pretty strong authority. Do you disagree with him?
Absolutely, I do. And I think there's evidence to suggest that you could disagree with that, but there's also the fact that...
Just share that evidence with us if you would, because it's two eminent legal scholars have said that what you are describing could not be part of the process of the voice.
It exists within the Constitution. What's there to say that proponents of the voice cannot challenge that in the High Court? What is there? What evidence is there to suggest that that cannot be challenged? Absolutely not within the High Court. I mean, you know, we've seen High Court challenges take place before with the Love case, with determining as to, you know, the citizenship of Indigenous Australians, whether if they, you know, were born, if they've got Indigenous heritage in them, but they're from another country, that they can not be cast out of our country should they actually, you know, commit a crime. I mean, if we leave everything up to High Court judges, they can be swayed by the feeling of the time, whatever political persuasion that they feel aligned with at the time, and we've seen that happen in the past.
Let's move on to some other questions. You also state categorically in your manifesto that Aboriginal Australians don't need more voices. But don't the ongoing problems in Alice Springs and in other parts of the country, the entrenched disadvantage that you were talking about earlier on in education and in health and housing, employment, some of the things we saw in Carly's report earlier, don't they suggest that Indigenous Australians very precisely need the stronger voice that the Uluru Dialogues put forward?
No, I don't believe that they need what the Uluru Dialogues put forward, because there's a lot of Aboriginal Australians who didn't agree with the Uluru Dialogue. There are 250 individual signatures on that Uluru Dialogue, and there are groups of people who quite clearly stated that they didn't support that dialogue, but this is what is being now brought by the Australian people as representative of all Indigenous Australians, which is utterly wrong. I mean, the other element of the voice is the fact that it suggests we're forever going to be living in disadvantage. That's not, ultimately, the result that we want is for Indigenous Australians to be able to have the same opportunities as everybody else, and not requiring, a change in our constitution. Really, that's what we want to aim for. That's ultimately what closing the gap looks like. But this voice mechanism doesn't speak to that at all. It just suggests we're forever going to be disadvantaged, and we need this change in our constitution for that to happen.
But the decades of disadvantage that those people in the story, and many people that you know in Alice Springs, including your own mother, asserted, that we've seen decades of failure. The proposal of the voice is to change that. Do you not find some sympathy with the idea that a new approach and a voice to the Australian Parliament is the route to make that change?
It can't be guaranteed, and it certainly can't be demonstrated that this is the ultimate be-all and end-all. And speaking of my mother, the very reason why she decided to put her hand up and run for a Country Liberal Party seat in the Territory was because of the fact that she was appointed by the then Deputy Chief Minister, Marion Scrimgeour, to be the chair of the Indigenous advisory body to the then Henderson government, and found that her voice wasn't being heard there. So she took the democratic route to be an elected representative, just like the 11 of us that now sit in federal parliament, to represent what the views are, certainly from our constituents, who include some of our most marginalised. That's the democratic process. It's up to us to actually heed those voices that currently exist. And I don't know why suddenly the voice to Parliament is the only way that any Parliament is going to listen to those voices that are loud and clear already.
And just quickly, your party, the CLP, do they hold the same position as you, that they are going to oppose the voice?
I think you'll find in the coming weeks that that's exactly what the position they will hold.
Senator Price, thank you very much indeed for joining the program.
Thanks for having me.